Hello, and welcome back to Sovereign Judgment, where suburban authority meets the one thing it fears most, someone who actually reads the paperwork. Today's story begins with an HOA banning backyard ponds and ends with 3 federal wildlife officials standing beside my patio, discussing the reproductive prospects of a goldfish named Kevin. Before we wade into that particular puddle of administrative misery, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and whether your neighborhood has ever tried to regulate water, wildlife, or basic human happiness. All right, let's release the fish. The first notice arrived at 7:42 on a Tuesday morning in a heavy cream-colored envelope, embossed with the silver crest of the Briar Glen Residential Association. The crest showed an oak tree, 2 crossed keys, and what appeared to be a ribbon bearing the Latin phrase, Ordo Domus, which roughly translated to, "We Googled Latin for 10 minutes." The envelope felt like it weighed 6 pounds, despite containing 1 sheet of paper and no useful ideas. I opened it at my kitchen table while wearing pizza socks and drinking coffee that had already gone cold, which was less a morning routine and more a slow surrender to adulthood. The letter read, "Notice of Immediate Water Feature Noncompliance." That was the heading. Not pond, not fish habitat, not small hole containing water. Water feature noncompliance, as though my backyard had failed a naval inspection. According to the notice, my pond violated Article 7, Section 14, Paragraph C of the Revised Community Standards because it represented an unmanaged source of standing water capable of attracting insects, amphibians, migratory birds, visual clutter, and reduced property confidence. I read, "Reduced property confidence" 3 times. My house apparently had self-esteem issues. The notice ordered me to drain and remove the pond within 10 calendar days, or face an initial fine of $250, followed by daily penalties of $75. At the bottom, someone had added a handwritten note in blue ink. Goldfish may be relocated to an indoor decorative vessel. The word decorative had been underlined twice. Kevin, my largest goldfish, floated near the pond's edge and stared at me with the blank, ancient disappointment of a creature who had survived 400 million years of evolution, only to be threatened by a woman with a laminator. "You hear that?" I asked him through the open kitchen window. "Your decor now." Kevin opened and closed his mouth. It was the most legally coherent response anyone would make for the next 3 months. "My name is Daniel Mercer, and I lived at 1148 Lantern Finch Lane in the fictional city of Bellwether, in equally fictional Rook County, where the summers smelled like fresh-cut grass, hot asphalt, and someone grilling chicken 2 streets over without knowing what seasoning was. I had bought the house 6 years earlier, after my wife Elaine died. That sentence still felt strange even after 6 years. Elaine had loved gardens, not the organized kind with measured rows and tasteful stone borders. She liked gardens that looked as though nature had broken into the yard and started freelancing. The pond had been her idea. It was 11 feet long, 7 feet wide, and 30 inches deep at the center, lined with smooth river rock and surrounded by dwarf irises, creeping thyme, and 1 stubborn patch of mint that had expanded like a small green empire with no respect for borders. We dug it together over 3 weekends. She chose the fish. Kevin was the last one she named. He was orange with 1 white patch above his left eye, giving him the permanent expression of a man who had just remembered he left the oven on. After Elaine passed, the pond became the quiet center of the property. I sat beside it in the evenings with my cold coffee. Neighborhood kids leaned over the fence to count the fish. Birds landed there. Frogs arrived without permits. Once a raccoon washed half a hamburger in it and left with more dignity than most HOA board members. It wasn't just landscaping. It was the last place Elaine and I had built together. I did not intend to drain it, because someone had recently discovered the phrase, property confidence. My professional background had trained me to react to official-looking nonsense in a particular way. I worked as an environmental compliance analyst for industrial construction projects. That meant I spent my days reading regulations written by committees who believed a sentence should not end until 3 departments had approved the punctuation. I knew the difference between an actual law, an enforceable covenant, a municipal guideline, a board policy, and something a board person typed in bold and hoped everyone obeyed. So I took the letter to my home office, scanned it, named the file Pond Compliance 01, and opened a spreadsheet. My spreadsheets tended to work on the first try, which was the closest thing I had to a supernatural power. At 9:16 that same morning, the HOA president arrived. Patricia Wexler came up Lantern Finch Lane in a white golf cart fitted with an amber rotating beacon, side mirrors, a roof, and a chrome badge on the front that read, Briar Glen Compliance. She drove it at approximately 9 miles per hour, with the solemn urgency of a field marshal invading a farmer's market. Patricia parked across the end of my driveway, even though the curb was empty for 70 feet in both directions. She stepped out, wearing pale green slacks ironed so sharply they looked capable of slicing deli meat, white orthopedic sneakers, and a floral blouse that resembled a botanical garden losing a custody battle. A laminated HOA identification badge hung from a blue lanyard around her neck. It displayed her photograph, her title, and the words, Authorized Community Official. She had authorized it herself. Under one arm, she carried a black clipboard thick enough to stop a crossbow bolt. Mr. Mercer, she said. Her voice had the tonal quality of a shopping cart, with one bad wheel being pushed through an empty parking garage. Patricia, that is President Wexler when I am conducting association business. Is the golf cart conducting association business too? Her lips tightened like a drawstring bag containing several angry ferrets. I'm here regarding your unauthorized aquatic installation. It was authorized in 2019, under the old architectural guidelines. I have the approval letter. Those guidelines have been superseded. Can you show me where the declaration gives the board retroactive authority over previously approved structures? Patricia blinked, not because she was thinking, because her rehearsed speech had encountered an unexpected curb. She looked down at her clipboard and flipped 3 pages with the brisk confidence of a magician whose rabbit had filed for unemployment. Article 7, Section 14, Paragraph C, she said. The board retains broad discretion to address conditions that threaten community standards, aesthetics, safety, sanitation, marketability, harmony, or the peaceful enjoyment of neighboring properties. Which neighboring property complained? That information is confidential. So there was a complaint? The board is not obligated to disclose its enforcement triggers. Was the rule approved by a homeowner vote? The board has emergency rulemaking authority. What was the emergency? Standing water. My pond has a pump, filter, waterfall, and circulation rate of 1,800 gallons per hour. She looked toward the yard as if I had accused her of stealing a church bell. The presence of mechanical equipment does not transform standing water into moving water. That is exactly what mechanical equipment does. Patricia drew herself upright with the posture of a 4-star general inspecting troops who had personally disappointed her by learning physics. You have 10 days, Mr. Mercer. Failure to comply will result in fines, legal referral, and possible suspension of amenity privileges. We don't have amenities. We have common areas. You mean the bench by the retention ditch? That is the Briar Glen Reflection Garden. It faces a storm drain. That is not the point. She tapped the clipboard with one manicured fingernail. The point is that the rule applies uniformly. Backyard ponds are no longer permitted. You may keep the goldfish indoors in a suitable aquarium. Kevin is 16 inches long. Then obtain a larger aquarium. He lives with 11 other fish. That sounds like a personal husbandry decision. The way she said husbandry suggested she had learned it 9 seconds earlier and already wanted it embroidered on a pillow. I folded my arms. Send me the meeting minutes, the emergency finding, the board resolution, and the legal review supporting retroactive enforcement. You can submit a records request. I did. At 8:31 this morning. Her eyes narrowed. For the first time, I saw a flicker of concern. It vanished beneath several layers of committee chairperson. You are making this much more complicated than it needs to be. I work in compliance. Complicated is where I keep my snacks. Patricia made a sound like a goose, discovering its taxes had been audited. Then she climbed back into the golf cart. As she pulled away, the amber beacon flashed across my garage door, transforming a dispute over 12 goldfish into what looked like a low-budget prison break. I was calm while she was there. After she left, I sat beside the pond for 20 minutes and felt my stomach twist. HOAs rarely win because they're right. They win because they have time, pooled money, established lawyers, and a mailing list full of people who would rather pay a fine than learn what a covenant is. I had one income, one house, and a deep sentimental attachment to a fish, with the facial expression of an underqualified accountant. The next letter arrived 2 days later. This one announced that my violation had been elevated to Level 2 Active Noncompliance. Apparently the pond had gained experience points. A $250 fine had been added to my account. The notice also ordered me to schedule an inspection with the Architectural Harmony Committee. I replied by certified mail, requesting evidence that the committee had authority to inspect a previously approved installation without owner consent. At 6:13 the following morning, Patricia posted a message in the Briar Glen homeowners Facebook group. Community Safety Alert. The board is addressing an unauthorized backyard body of water that may present mosquito, drowning, wildlife, insurance, and resale concerns. Residents are reminded not to enter private property or approach unapproved aquatic environments. She did not name me. She attached a photograph of my house. The picture had been taken from the driver's seat of her golf cart. My mailbox number was clearly visible. By 6:45, 14 people had commented. Most asked whether there was an alligator. One asked if it was the Mercer Lagoon. My pond held 920 gallons. A lagoon it was not. At 7:02, my neighbor, Sofia Delgado, commented, "My toddler has bath toys that displace more water." Patricia deleted the comment. At 7:08, Sofia reposted it with a photograph of an inflatable duck. Patricia turned off commenting. By Friday, the board had issued me a second fine of $325 for failure to facilitate inspection. I had never agreed to an inspection date. At 4:20 that afternoon, Patricia and 2 board members appeared at my side gate. Patricia wore a navy visor, a pearl necklace, and a white polo shirt, embroidered with the HOA crest, like a military decoration she had personally awarded herself after the Battle of Mulch Bed. Beside her stood Treasurer Leonard Pike, a thin man with a mustache so narrow it looked like punctuation, and Secretary Diane Cresswell, who carried a tablet and smiled with the nervous enthusiasm of someone who had joined a book club and discovered it was actually a militia. Patricia knocked on the locked gate. "Mr. Mercer." I came around from the garage holding a wrench. "Can I help you?" "We are here for the scheduled compliance inspection." "No inspection was scheduled. We offered you an opportunity to coordinate. You sent a demand, and you failed to respond appropriately." I responded by certified mail. That response was adversarial. It asked what authority you had to enter my yard. Patricia raised the clipboard in front of her like a shield, used exclusively against accountability. Article 11, Section 3, Paragraph F, allows reasonable access to verify ongoing compliance. With 48 hours notice and owner consent, except in emergencies. This is an emergency. Kevin looks stable. Patricia peered through the gate. Kevin drifted past a water lily with the serenity of a tiny orange landlord collecting rent. The board cannot assess the threat from here. What threat? Mosquitoes, contamination, wildlife attraction, drowning. The pond is filtered, treated, fenced, and shallower than Diane's decorative fountain. Diane stopped typing. "My fountain is tasteful," she said quietly. "I'm sure it is." Patricia reached for the gate latch. I put one hand against the gate. "Do not enter my property." She froze, her fingertips 2 inches from the latch. The temperature in the conversation dropped so quickly you could have stored seafood in it. "Are you denying the board access?" "I'm denying 3 people access who arrived without lawful notice, owner consent, or an emergency." Leonard shifted backward like a man reconsidering every decision that had led him to a stranger's side gate at 4:20 on a Friday. Patricia smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It spread across her face like a crack forming in a windshield. "Your refusal will be documented. Please spell my name correctly. You may find that flippancy becomes expensive. You may find that documentation works both ways." I pointed toward the small security camera mounted above the garage. Patricia looked up. The red status light blinked. Her expression changed from triumph to calculation, so fast it could have been used to test reflexes at a medical school. She lowered her hand. "We will proceed through counsel. Have a good weekend." "I doubt you will." She turned and marched back to the golf cart, moving with the rigid momentum of a person trying not to admit she had just lost an argument to a gate. Leonard followed. Diane lingered for half a second. "Your irises are lovely," she whispered. Then she hurried after them. The following Monday, a letter arrived from Crowder, Snipe, and Bell, the law firm representing the HOA. It demanded removal of the pond, payment of $575 in fines, $420 in administrative fees, and $685 in legal costs. That brought the total to $1,680. The letter warned that continued non-compliance could result in a lien. My coffee went cold while I read it. Again. At this point, I suspected the universe was cooling my coffee personally. I called the law firm and asked for the attorney who signed the letter. A receptionist transferred me to Mason Crowder, Jr. He spoke in the smooth, careful tone of a man who charged by the 10th of an hour and could hear billable units falling from the sky. "Mr. Mercer, the association would prefer an amicable resolution." "So would I. Please send the board resolution adopting the pond ban." "I'm not the association's records custodian. The letter says I violated a revised rule. I requested the revision. Nobody has provided it. The board has represented that the rule was properly adopted. Did your firm review the adoption?" A pause. Tiny, but useful. "Our correspondence is based on information supplied by our client." "So no, that is not what I said. It's what your invoice will eventually say." His voice stiffened like a hotel towel folded into a swan. "I suggest you focus on compliance rather than semantics. I'm an environmental compliance analyst. Semantics are where enforcement actions go to die." "Mr. Mercer, are you represented by counsel?" "Not yet." "Then I advise you to exercise caution. I advise your client not to enter my property." Another pause. "I'll convey that." 2 days later, Patricia called the police. Officer Calvin Rusk arrived at 3:18 in the afternoon in a marked bellwether patrol car. He was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and carried himself like a man who had once responded to a sword fight at a frozen yogurt shop and had not been surprised. Patricia arrived 30 seconds later in the golf cart. She had upgraded the amber beacon. It now flashed in 2 directions. "Officer," she said, hurrying toward him with the clipboard hugged to her chest. "This homeowner has obstructed an official safety inspection and is maintaining a hazardous body of water in violation of community law." Officer Rusk looked at me. "Community law?" "HOA rule," I said. He looked at Patricia. "Do you have a court order? We have a covenant right of access. Do you have owner consent?" "He is refusing consent." "Is there an emergency?" "Yes." "What is it?" She pointed over the fence. "Unregulated water." Officer Rusk stared at the fence, then at Patricia, then at the cloudless sky. "How long has the water been there?" 6 years. He nodded slowly. "A slow emergency." Patricia's jaw tightened. "This is not a matter for sarcasm." I wasn't being sarcastic. That was the most devastating part. Officer Rusk asked to see my approval letter, the inspection clause, the HOA notices, and my camera footage. I handed him a folder. Patricia handed him her clipboard. He reviewed everything against the hood of his patrol car, while Patricia narrated each page as though she were providing director's commentary for a documentary called Pond Criminals of North America. After 8 minutes, Officer Rusk closed the folder. "Mr. Mercer hasn't committed a crime. He is obstructing our legal authority. That's a civil disagreement. He threatened us." Patricia said it so confidently that Leonard Pike, who had appeared in the golf cart's passenger seat, looked surprised enough to swallow his mustache. Officer Rusk turned to me. "Did you threaten them?" "I told them not to enter my yard." "That was the threat," Patricia said. Officer Rusk looked at her with the patient emptiness of a vending machine after it has eaten your dollar. "No, ma'am. That was a boundary." She lifted her chin. "I want that statement included in the report. I can include that you requested entry, he denied entry, and no crime occurred. I also want it noted that the pond may attract federally regulated wildlife." I looked at her. Officer Rusk looked at her. Even Leonard looked at her. Patricia continued, energized by the sound of her own mistake. "Birds, frogs, protected migratory species, who knows what else. The association cannot be exposed to that liability." Officer Rusk handed back my folder. "So your concern is that his pond might become subject to federal protections?" "My concern is that it violates our rules. You mentioned federal wildlife. I was listing hazards." Officer Rusk opened his notebook. I'll list that too. He returned to his patrol car, then stopped with one hand on the door. This is a fish pond, ma'am, not a hostage situation. He drove away. Patricia's own phrase stayed with me. Federally regulated wildlife. I went inside, reheated my coffee, forgot about it, and began researching. The HOA did not slow down. Over the next 11 days, I received 4 additional notices. One fined me $150 for visual aquatic nuisance, even though the pond could not be seen from the street. Another fined me $200 for failure to maintain cooperative communication. A third fined me $375 for ongoing habitat attraction. That one was especially impressive because habitat attraction had not appeared in any published rule. The fourth notice demanded a $1,000 compliance bond before I could appeal the other fines. The running total reached $3,405. Patricia also mailed an educational flyer to all 138 homes in Briar Glen. The flyer featured a cartoon mosquito the size of a Labrador, and the headline, "Backyard Ponds, Pretty Today, Public Health Crisis Tomorrow." Under common risks, it listed algae, drowning, frogs, insects, odors, invasive species, insurance cancellation, sinking soil, venomous snakes, and government intervention. Government intervention appeared in bold. I framed the flyer. Then Patricia made her biggest mistake. At the monthly board meeting held in the Bellwether Community Fellowship Hall on June 18th at 7 p.m., she introduced Resolution 24-19. I attended and recorded the meeting, as permitted by state law and the association's own open meeting policy. 37 homeowners sat in folding chairs beneath fluorescent lights that made everyone look like they had recently been questioned by customs. Patricia sat behind a 6-foot plastic table draped with a navy cloth bearing the HOA crest. Her clipboard rested beside a wooden gavel. No bylaw authorized the gavel. She had brought it from home. Resolution 2419, she announced, clarifies that all backyard ponds, fish basins, ornamental pools, aquatic gardens, and artificial habitats are prohibited, regardless of prior approval, unless removal would violate applicable municipal, state, or federal law. I sat up. So did Sofia Delgado, who was beside me, eating almonds from a sandwich bag, with the focused intensity of a sports commentator awaiting a replay. Patricia continued. This exemption is included solely to prevent conflict with superior legal authority. It does not excuse speculative claims, personal interpretations, or bad faith attempts to evade community standards. She looked directly at me. I raised my hand. Patricia sighed. Mr. Mercer, could you read the exemption again? It is displayed on the screen. For the minutes. Her nostrils flared like 2 tiny emergency vents. Unless removal would violate applicable municipal, state, or federal law, so a pond protected by federal law would be exempt. No ordinary residential pond is protected by federal law. That wasn't my question. The exemption speaks for itself. It does. Sophia stopped chewing. Patricia tapped the gavel. Further debate will be limited to 2 minutes per homeowner. Was this resolution reviewed by council? I asked. The board has broad rulemaking discretion. That's not an answer. Your time is expiring. Was it reviewed by council? Patricia leaned toward the microphone, her voice stretching tight like dental floss holding up a piano. The board does not require permission from outside counsel to protect this community. There it was, clear, recorded, beautiful. Resolution 2419 passed 3 votes to 2. Diane Cresswell and another board member, Harold Wynn, voted no. Patricia, Leonard, and Vice President Marjorie Blaine voted yes. When Patricia struck the gavel, the head flew off, bounced once on the table, and rolled into Leonard's lap. Nobody laughed immediately. Then Sophia made a snorting noise. The entire back row collapsed. Patricia retrieved the gavel head with the stiff dignity of a monarch whose crown had fallen into a bowl of coleslaw. I went home and called Dr. Michael, Big Mike Barlow. Mike ran the Aquatic Genetics and Conservation Laboratory at North Bellwether State College. We had worked together 4 years earlier on a wetland mitigation project involving a protected minnow, 3 acres of cattails, and a developer who kept referring to the ecosystem as the damp section. Mike was 6'4", shaped like a vending machine that had developed strong opinions about municipal drainage, and wore a gray beard broad enough to qualify as secondary habitat. When he answered the phone, I could hear bubbling tanks behind him. "Daniel Mercer," he boomed. "The only man I know who can make a spreadsheet testify under oath. I have a fish question. Medical, legal, romantic, or culinary? Regulatory. My favorite flavor." I explained the pond ban, the fines, Patricia's flyer, and Resolution 2419. Mike listened in silence. When I finished, he said, "Do you still have Kevin?" "Yes." "The big orange one with the white cranial patch?" "Yes." "Any unusual traits?" "He's 16 inches long, survived 2 freezes, and seems immune to embarrassment." "Breeding behavior?" "He fathered most of the smaller fish." Mike went quiet. I heard keys clicking. "What water temperature do you maintain?" "Between 62 and 74 degrees seasonally." "Filtration?" "Biological and mechanical. No chemical algicides." "Source stock?" "Elaine bought him from Harrow Pond and Feed in 2019. The receipt says Heritage Waken Goldfish, red-white line." More clicking. Then Mike made a noise like a walrus discovering a coupon. "Daniel." "Yes? You may own a genetically significant regional heritage strain. That sounds important. It means Kevin might be more bureaucratically powerful than your HOA president. I'm listening." Mike explained that several ornamental fish strains maintained distinct genetic markers not present in mass-produced commercial stock. Most meant nothing legally. But the red-white bellwether Waken line had been part of a discontinued state university breeding program established to study cold tolerance and disease resistance in ornamental carp relatives. After the program closed, most verified specimens disappeared into private ponds. 2 years earlier, the fictional Federal Bureau of Aquatic Biodiversity had opened a Heritage Domestic Species Preservation Registry. It was not the Endangered Species Act. Kevin was not a bald eagle with fins, but verified domestic genetic lines could receive protected research stock designation if they were rare, scientifically valuable, responsibly maintained, and part of an approved preservation plan. Once enrolled, intentional destruction or forced relocation of the registered habitat without agency review could violate federal preservation regulations tied to research permits and genetic resource agreements. "How long does designation take?" I asked. "Usually 6 months." My shoulders dropped. Mike continued. "Unless the specimen is already traceable to archived program stock, and there's an immediate risk of habitat destruction." I sat up again. "What would you need?" "Water samples, scale swabs, photographs, the purchase record, your maintenance logs, a site inspection, and approximately 19 forms designed by people who believe margins are a moral issue." "I can do 19 forms." "I know. That's why the fish god sent you to me." Then he added the sentence that made me understand I had found the right person. "People like Patricia Wexler think regulations are a stick. They never imagine the stick has another end." Mike came to my house the next morning. He arrived in a battered blue van labeled Barlow Aquatic Conservation Services. The van sounded like a toolbox falling down a staircase and smelled faintly of pond water, coffee, and rubber boots. With him was Dr. Priya Shah, a federal contract geneticist who was 5'2", wore red-framed glasses, and moved with the brisk purpose of a hummingbird that had been appointed department chair. Priya inspected Kevin. Kevin inspected Priya. She scanned his body, photographed his scale pattern, collected a non-invasive mucus swab, and measured him at exactly 16 3/8 inches. "Excellent confirmation," she said. "He'll be relieved." She looked at me over her glasses. "Do you joke when you're nervous?" "I also make spreadsheets." "Ah, severe case." Mike examined the pond, pump, filtration unit, shade coverage, water parameters, and predator barrier. He crouched beside the waterfall, ran water through his fingers, and nodded. "This habitat is better managed than my first apartment." Priya reviewed my maintenance records. Elaine had started them in 2019 in a green notebook. I had continued after she died. Dates, water temperatures, fish growth, spawning cycles, treatments, plant changes. Priya turned each page carefully. "This is unusually complete." She liked records. "This may be enough to establish continuous lineage stewardship." I watched her hand rest briefly on Elaine's handwriting. For the first time in weeks, the situation stopped being funny. Mike seemed to notice. He put one huge hand on my shoulder. "We'll treat it with care," he said. I nodded. Thank you. They submitted Kevin's genetic material to the North Bellwether State Archive. 3 days later, the preliminary match came back at 98.7% confidence. Kevin was descended from B.W. Wakin line 4C, one of only 3 known surviving branches of the Bellwether cold-resistant heritage strain. 2 of the other verified fish were sterile. Kevin was not. Kevin had spent the previous spring demonstrating that fact with the reckless energy of a celebrity on his 4th marriage. Mike filed an emergency preservation petition. Priya prepared a habitat continuity assessment. I completed 23 forms, not 19, because federal optimism is always punished. Meanwhile, Patricia escalated again. On June 25th, the HOA mailed me a notice of final opportunity. The total demanded was now $5,230. The letter gave me 72 hours to drain the pond, or the association would authorize contractor access to abate the violation at owner expense. I emailed Mason Crowder Jr. I wrote, "Your client has threatened entry and destruction of a habitat currently under federal preservation review. Please instruct the board not to enter my property or alter the pond. Supporting documentation is attached." I attached the petition acknowledgement, Dr. Shah's assessment, the genetic lab report, and Patricia's own resolution 24-19. Mason called me 14 minutes later. His voice no longer sounded like polished marble. It sounded like someone had dropped polished marble on his foot. "Mr. Mercer, what exactly have you done?" "I applied for federal research stock protection." "For a goldfish?" "Yes. You understand. This appears retaliatory. I began researching after your client publicly identified federal wildlife regulation as a pond hazard. That statement was colloquial. It's in a police report." A long silence. "You should not assume the petition will be approved." "I'm not. That's why I'm asking your client to wait. The board may consider a temporary pause." "Good." I said may. "Then tell Patricia not to enter. I will speak with her." He did. Patricia ignored him. At 8:05 the next morning, she posted another Facebook message. "Rumors are circulating that a non-compliant homeowner has attempted to misuse federal wildlife procedures to avoid community rules. The board will not be intimidated by paperwork theatrics." Paperwork theatrics. From a woman whose clipboard had its own weather system. At 10:30, Mason emailed me. "Please disregard any public statements not issued through counsel. The association will take no physical action pending internal review." At 10:37, Patricia emailed me directly. "Contractor inspection remains scheduled for Friday at 9 a.m. Access will occur under covenant authority. Do not obstruct." I forwarded it to Mason. His reply contained only 6 words. "I did not authorize this communication." Friday morning arrived bright, hot, and offensively cheerful. At 8:12, a black federal utility vehicle pulled into my driveway. Priya stepped out carrying a waterproof case. Behind her came Regional Preservation Officer Elias Boone, a narrow, sun-browned man with a gray ponytail and the expression of someone who had spent 30 years explaining to developers that wetlands remained wet, even when inconvenient. The emergency designation had been approved at 6:48 that morning. Kevin and his verified offspring were now enrolled as protected heritage research stock, BOOZ 4C-017. My pond had been registered as the primary continuity habitat. A temporary federal habitat marker had to be installed until the permanent plaque arrived. The marker was not subtle. It was a blue and white sign mounted on 2 metal posts. Protected Aquatic Genetic Resource, Federal Research Habitat Entry, or Alteration Requires Authorization Case. BOV US 4C-017. It stood 4 feet high beside the gate. At 8:44, Mike arrived in his van with a portable examination tank, 2 graduate assistants, and a folding table. At 8:51, Sofia Delgado came outside, carrying a lawn chair and iced tea. At 8:53, 7 more neighbors appeared. Nobody had invited them. Suburban information travels faster than light because light does not have access to Facebook. At 8:57, I heard the amber beacon before I saw it. Patricia's golf cart rounded the corner, leading a small convoy. Behind her came a white pickup truck from Clearflow Landscape Abatement. A vinyl decal on the door showed a smiling man spraying a fountain. In the passenger seat sat Leonard Pike. Diane Cresswell followed in her own car, perhaps to witness, perhaps to prevent, or perhaps because she had finally accepted that wherever Patricia went, There was a good chance a gavel would come apart. Patricia stopped at the curb. She saw the federal vehicle. She saw the sign. She saw Officer Boone. Her face moved through 4 expressions in 3 seconds: confusion, suspicion, outrage, and the dawning realization that Kevin now had better institutional support than she did. She stepped out wearing beige slacks, a coral blazer, and a straw hat so broad it looked like a patio umbrella seeking political office. Her clipboard was tucked under one arm. "What is this?" she demanded. Officer Boone glanced at the sign. "Seems pretty well labeled." Patricia marched toward my driveway, with the determined stiffness of a wind-up toy crossing a kitchen floor. "Daniel, remove this sign." "No. You do not have approval for freestanding signage. It's a required federal marker. This is private association property. It's my lot. The association retains architectural authority." Officer Boone stepped forward. "Elias Boone, Federal Bureau of Aquatic Biodiversity." Patricia looked at his identification card but did not take it. "I am Patricia Wexler, President of the Briar Glen Residential Association." Boone nodded. "Congratulations. I was not informed of any federal operation. You were copied on the designation notice at 7:14 this morning. I do not conduct official business before 8. The fish did." Sophia coughed iced tea into her cup. Patricia turned toward me. "This spectacle does not alter your violation." I handed her a copy of Resolution 24-19. It exempts ponds whose removal would violate federal law. It exempts legitimate federal restrictions. This is one. I dispute that. Officer Boone's voice remained calm. "You're free to submit an administrative challenge. Until it's resolved, nobody drains, relocates, chemically treats, or materially disturbs this habitat." Patricia looked at the Clearflow truck. The contractor, a man named Dale Pritchard, had gotten out and was reading the sign. Dale was thick around the middle, deeply tanned, and wore wraparound sunglasses that made him look like a youth baseball coach preparing to raid a beehive. He walked over. "Ma'am," he said to Patricia, "you told us this was an abandoned decorative pond. It is an unauthorized water feature. There are federal people here. They have been misled." Dale pointed at the sign. "That sign has a case number. Anyone can print a sign." Officer Boone held up the designation letter. "I cannot." Dale removed his sunglasses. "I'm not touching it." Patricia's voice rose like a tea kettle, being informed it had no jurisdiction. "You are under contract. Our contract says lawful abatement. It doesn't say wrestle the federal government over a carp." "Goldfish," Mike said. Dale looked at him. "Good to know." Patricia turned on Leonard. "Call Mason." Leonard already had his phone out. "He's calling me." "Answer it." "I did. He said not to proceed." Patricia's expression tightened until her entire face resembled a purse snapped shut around a wasp. "This board has independent enforcement authority." Diane walked up from the curb. "No, Patricia. We don't." Patricia spun toward her. "You voted against the resolution." "Yes, because Mason told us it was reckless. You are breaching executive confidentiality. You said at the meeting it didn't need legal review." Diane pointed toward my security camera. "And you said it on video." There were now 14 neighbors watching. Sophia had passed out 2 additional lawn chairs. Patricia looked around and seemed to realize the audience was no longer arranged in her favor. She squared her shoulders. "This does not change the underlying fact that Mr. Mercer manipulated a regulatory process." Priya stepped beside the pond gate. "The genetic testing was independently verified. The preservation line is real. You work for him. I work under federal contract. Then he manipulated you." Priya smiled with the gentle patience of a surgeon, explaining that the fork must be removed from the patient before dinner continues. "Ma'am, your resident maintained a rare breeding line for 7 years, kept complete husbandry records, preserved its original habitat, and voluntarily enrolled the specimens in a monitored conservation program. That is the opposite of manipulation." Patricia raised her clipboard. Article 11, Section 3, Paragraph F, grants the board access for inspection. Officer Boone looked at me. "Do you consent to her entering?" "No." He looked back at Patricia. "Then you may not enter. The covenant grants access. Your own resolution recognizes superior federal authority. I drafted that exemption to protect the association." "It did," I said. "Just not from me." That landed. Patricia stared at the paper she had written. Proposed, defended, and passed. Her own exemption sat in her hands like a mousetrap that had finished reading the instructions. For a moment, I thought she might retreat. Mason was on Leonard's phone, his voice faintly audible. "Patricia, do not enter the property." Officer Boone repeated the warning. "Do not cross the gate." Dale Pritchard leaned against his truck and said, "I'd listened to both lawyers." "Mason isn't here," Patricia snapped. "He's on speaker," Leonard said. Patricia pressed her lips together. Then she did what Patricia always did when facts formed a complete wall in front of her. She decided posture was a ladder. "I am conducting a visual inspection," she announced. "I will not touch the pond. I will simply verify conditions pursuant to the covenant." I stepped between her and the gate. "You do not have permission." She pointed one finger at me. "You cannot obstruct an association officer." "Patricia," Mason's voice said through Leonard's phone. "Stop." She ignored him. Officer Boone moved closer. "Ma'am, crossing that marked boundary without authorization may compromise the habitat review and create a federal violation. I am not compromising anything. You have been warned. I have a duty to this community." Sophia raised her iced tea. "No, you have a hobby." Patricia made a sound like a smoke detector discovering jazz. Then she marched past the gatepost. She crossed the marked boundary voluntarily, loudly, and in front of 16 witnesses, 2 cameras, 1 federal officer, 1 contract geneticist, 3 scientists, an HOA secretary, an increasingly pale treasurer, and a landscape contractor who had begun filming with his phone. Her first 3 steps were dramatic. Her fourth encountered the wet edge of my creeping time. The time grew across a flat stone beside the waterfall. Patricia's orthopedic sneaker slipped approximately 6 inches. She windmilled both arms. The clipboard flew upward. Her straw hat spun off like a hubcap, leaving a poorly maintained sedan. She did not fall into the pond. She landed seated on the low stone border, with both feet planted in 6 inches of shallow water. Kevin drifted over. He stopped directly in front of her knees. Patricia screamed. It was half shriek, half trumpet blast, and entirely disproportionate to a goldfish moving at the speed of a thoughtful sandwich. "Get it away from me." Kevin remained where he was. "He lives there," I said. Patricia tried to stand. Her wet soul slipped again, and she grabbed the nearest stable object. Unfortunately, the nearest stable object was the temporary federal habitat sign. She pulled it sideways. One metal post came loose from the soft soil. The sign tilted into the folding examination table, knocking over a plastic sample tray. Nothing hazardous spilled, but the sound was spectacular. Trays clattered. Clipboards slapped the ground. A stack of waterproof forms burst loose and fluttered across the patio like bureaucratic pigeons released at a government wedding. Officer Boone stepped forward. "Do not move. I am being attacked." "By what?" "The fish." Kevin had already lost interest. He was inspecting a pebble. Mike waded into the shallow shelf wearing his rubber boots and offered Patricia one enormous hand. "Grab on." She looked at him. "Who are you?" "The man keeping you from becoming Exhibit B." She took his hand. Mike lifted her upright with the ease of someone removing a decorative pillow from a couch. Water streamed from her slacks. A strand of pondweed clung to her blazer. Her straw hat floated upside down beside the iris bed, like a tiny beige lifeboat abandoned by all rational passengers. Patricia stood dripping on the patio. Her dignity had not survived immersion. Her clipboard had. It floated near the edge. Dale retrieved it with a pool skimmer from his truck. "Water resistant," he said. "Nice." Officer Boone straightened the sign. "Ma'am, I warned you not to enter. I slipped." "You entered before you slipped? The surface was unsafe. You were told not to cross it. This homeowner deliberately created a hazard. The pond has been here for 6 years. He placed vegetation in my path. The time has been there since 2020, I said. It's in the garden log." Patricia pointed at me with a wet, shaking hand. "You planned this." "I did not plan for you to ignore a federal officer and sit in my pond." Officer Boone looked toward the security camera. "Is that recording?" "Yes." Dale held up his phone. "So is this." Sophia raised hers. "This one too." Diane lifted her tablet. "And the meeting minutes will reflect the warnings." Leonard still held Mason on speaker. Mason's voice emerged from the phone with the exhausted despair of a man watching his invoice become evidence. Patricia, say nothing else. Patricia drew herself up. Water ran from the hems of her slacks. A tiny snail clung to one sneaker. She looked like a cruise director who had lost an argument with the cruise. I acted under my authority as president. Mason spoke louder. Stop talking. I will not be intimidated by theatrical federal interference. Patricia, this designation is fraudulent, and I intend to order the pond drained before sundown. Every person in the yard went still. Even the papers seemed to stop fluttering. Officer Boone took out a citation notebook. Thank you, he said. Patricia blinked. For what? For stating intent to destroy registered research stock after formal notice. I did not say destroy. You said drain the habitat. The fish can be moved. Relocation requires authorization. I reject your authority. That will be included. Officer Calvin Rusk arrived 7 minutes later. Someone had called the police. I later learned it was Mason Crowder Jr. Officer Rusk stepped through the gate, took in the federal sign, the tilted examination table, the soaked HOA president, the floating hat, the cluster of neighbors, and Kevin, cruising calmly through the shallows. He closed his eyes for 1 second. Mr. Mercer, he said, why is President Wexler wet? She entered after being warned not to. Patricia pointed at the pond. He maintains a dangerous environment. Officer Rusk looked at Boone. Federal? Protected research habitat. Valid. Yes. Was she warned? 3 times verbally, once in writing, once by counsel, and once by the sign she pulled out of the ground. Officer Rusk looked at Patricia. Did you enter? I exercised covenant access. That's a yes. I slipped because the premises were unsafe. You were trespassing into the unsafe premises? I was not trespassing. Did the owner deny permission? His denial was invalid. Officer Rusk sighed. The sigh had depth. It sounded like air leaving an old courthouse. Ma'am, you were told not to go in. You went in, you sat in federally protected fish water, and then you announced plans to drain it. That is a biased summary. It is the shortest accurate one. Officer Rusk took statements from everyone. Officer Boone issued Patricia a formal notice of unauthorized habitat entry and potential interference with registered preservation stock. It was not a criminal charge. Nobody handcuffed her. Nobody dragged her away. That would have been less painful for Patricia than what actually happened. She had to stand on my driveway in wet slacks while every person she had attempted to command calmly documented what she had done. Dale Pritchard canceled the abatement contract. He also informed Leonard that Clearflow would charge the HOA a $600 mobilization fee because Patricia had misrepresented the job. Mason instructed the board to suspend all enforcement against me immediately. Diane called an emergency board meeting. Leonard resigned as treasurer on the spot. He handed Patricia the association checkbook as though it were a live possum. I'm done, he said. You cannot resign during an enforcement action. I just did. He walked home. Patricia remained in the driveway, holding her damp clipboard. The paper edges had curled upward. For once, it looked exactly as authoritative as it was. Officer Rusk finished his notes and returned my folder. Then he looked at Patricia's floating hat, Kevin's protected habitat sign, and the golf cart with its amber beacon still rotating at the curb. All this, he said, because a fish was outside. He got back into his patrol car and left. The institutional collapse took less than a month. Once Mason Crowder reviewed the full record, he withdrew the HOA's fines and advised the board that Resolution 24-19 required them to recognize the federal designation. He also advised that Patricia's unauthorized entry, public statements, contractor instructions, and repeated disregard of counsel could fall outside the association's insurance coverage. The insurer agreed. The HOA's directors and officers carrier issued a reservation of rights letter that ran 9 pages and contained the phrase, intentional non-compliance with legal advice, 4 separate times. The management company terminated its contract. The reason given was governance instability. That was corporate language for Patricia keeps turning ordinary landscaping into litigation. At the July 2 emergency meeting, 89 homeowners attended. The fellowship hall had only 60 chairs. People stood along the walls. Someone brought popcorn in a mixing bowl. Patricia sat at the board table, wearing a navy suit and an expression like a courthouse statue that had just received a parking ticket. Her replacement clipboard was red, possibly waterproof. She attempted to call the meeting to order. The microphone was not on. She struck the repaired gavel. The head stayed attached this time, but the handle cracked. Sofia Delgado raised a motion to remove Patricia as president. Diane seconded it. The room voted by secret ballot. 78 supported removal. 9 opposed. 2 ballots contained drawings of Goldfish and were ruled invalid. Patricia demanded a recount. The recount produced the same result, plus 1 additional fish drawing. She was removed from office at 7:46 p.m. Diane resigned immediately afterward. "I don't want the job," she said, "and that's why I'm probably qualified for it." The room applauded. She agreed to serve as interim president for 90 days. Her entire inaugural address was 11 words. "Please pay your dues and try not to ruin anyone's Tuesday." It was the best governance Briar Glen had ever experienced. The pond ban was repealed. The board adopted a new water feature rule requiring circulation, basic safety measures, and maintenance. The rule fit on 1 page. No one used the phrase property confidence. The HOA canceled its legal action, refunded my appeal fees, removed every fine, and reimbursed me $1,1240 for professional review costs. I donated half of it to Mike's aquatic conservation lab. The lab used the money to buy a new portable oxygen meter. They named it Patricia. Mike said it reacted poorly under pressure. Kevin's permanent plaque arrived in August. It was smaller than the temporary sign and far more tasteful. The preservation program inspected the pond twice during the first year. Kevin fathered 23 verified offspring, 9 of which were transferred to approved research ponds. He became, in the driest possible administrative language, a high-value reproductive contributor. I framed that too. Briar Glen changed in small ways after Patricia left the board. Sofia installed a tiny frog pond beside her garden and named the largest frog Vice President. Dale Pritchard returned to improve my filtration system at cost. Diane organized a neighborhood picnic without forming a picnic-compliant subcommittee. Kids began leaning over my fence again to count the fish. An older neighbor named Martin Hale, who had once been fined $90 because his trash bin remained visible for 11 minutes after sunset, stopped me at the mailbox one evening. He shook my hand. "I thought nobody could beat them," he said. "I didn't beat them." He glanced toward the pond. "No? They wrote an exemption." Kevin qualified. Patricia listed her house for sale in September. It stayed on the market for 104 days. She eventually moved to a downtown condominium called The Meridian, where the landscaping was managed professionally, the ponds were indoors, and residents were prohibited from operating private golf carts in the lobby. I heard she joined the building's decor committee. Some species adapt slowly. As for me, I still sit beside the pond most evenings with my cold coffee and my pizza socks. The irises bloom every spring. The mint continues its campaign for territorial expansion. Kevin drifts beneath the lily pads, officially protected, genetically valuable, and completely unaware that he defeated an HOA president, restructured a neighborhood government, triggered an insurance review, and earned more federal paperwork than most adults. So tell me in the comments, what is the most ridiculous rule an HOA or neighbor has ever tried to enforce against you? Like the video, subscribe, and join us again here at Sovereign Judgment. Patricia tried to drain my pond, but in the end, she was the only thing the neighborhood voted to remove.